Hello class. Today we're going to take our next step into the 8th grade by looking at equations. But before we can do that, we got to go all the way back to 6th grade and make sure that we understand how to do the 6th grade process before we can get to the 7th grade process, which is what our lesson today is talking about. And then we'll get into the 8th grade process. But before we do that, we're going to play a little game called Guess My Number. And what I'd like for you to do is, when I give you a problem, I want you to guess what number goes inside the box. So here's our first question. Box plus 8 equals 12. What number goes inside there? Well, hopefully you realized that that was 4. Pretty simple. Next one. Blank minus 5 equals 3. So what number, when I subtract 5, will give me 3? Hopefully you know that that's 8. What about 4 times blank equals 28? Well, 4 times blank equals 28. That blank, it is a multiply because it's a dot. We know that that blank's going to be a 7. And then one last one. What if I have a division problem? Blank over 5. That means blank divided by 5 is going to equal 4. What number could I put in the blank? Hopefully you know that that's going to be 20. Well, the reason why we do this is because equations are just looking for a box. That's all it amounts to. This type of question you've been doing since kindergarten, 1st grade. Well, once you get into 6th and 7th grade, your box changes. It changes to a variable. And we end up with x plus 8 equals 12. Our question's still the same. What's inside the box? What number would go in there to make that thing true? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Well, there's one other skill that you're going to need in order to be able to understand equations, and that is order of operations. So if I were to give you a question like this, what's the process that we use to help us remember? Hopefully you remember that it's please, excuse, my dear, and Sally. It's just order of operations. So if we were to do this one by hand, even though you do have a calculator on your desk, we would work the parenthesis part first. So we would do 3 squared plus 4 parenthesis, and then we would actually do the 5 minus 8. Well, we know in subtraction, right now what we do is change subtraction to addition next to its opposite. If we can't do it, and you end up with a negative 3 divided by 2. So now we're going to move to our exponents. We did our parentheses, now move to the exponents. So we know 3 to the 2nd power is going to give us 9 plus 4 parentheses negative 3 divided by 2. Now we're going to move to the multiply divide. So 9 plus, well, 4 times negative 3 will give me a negative 12. And then I immediately divide that by 2, which would give me a negative 6. And now we deal with our add subtract. 9 plus negative 6 gives me 3 for my overall answer. So in order to be able to solve equations, you have to understand order of operations, because what we're really going to do is work order of operations backwards. The last thing we do in an order of operations problem is the first thing that we get rid of in an equation, which was add subtract. Then we get rid of multiply divide. Then we get rid of the exponents. Then we get rid of the parentheses. And once you've gotten rid of all of those things, working backwards, you should have your answer. Because that's really all an equation is, okay, is solving a mystery, okay? Finding your keys, finding your wallet, finding your cell phone. You retrace your steps until you're able to find it. And that's the solution to our problem. So, got a couple things here, a couple questions. What is an equation? Well, an equation is nothing but 2 expressions that are equal to each other. We have a goal in an equation. So what is that goal for an equation? To solve for the variable, to find out what's inside the box. That's what we're trying to do. So with equations, with more than one operation, you solve using reverse order of operations. You start with add subtract. Next, you reverse the multiply or divide, and you've got your 2-step equations. So what I'd like to do is I want to show you where we're headed. Okay, in a couple weeks, this is where we're going to be. Okay, this is a typical 8th grade equation. This is what you're expected to be able to solve by the end of 8th grade. Okay, now, you may not know how to do that just yet, but that's where we're at. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and solve this one really quick, come up with an answer, and then we're going to take it all the way back to the beginning and make sure that we understand how to do this step by step. So this is what I would expect you to be able to do by the end of my class. So here's what we do on this question. Okay, that's what I will expect you to be able to do in about 3 weeks. Yeah. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to step it back a little bit. In order to be able to solve this kind of a question, you have to go back to basics. Now, when I show you these problems, basic means pretty basic, okay? So if you can't do some of these questions in our head, we've got a problem. But what we have to do is we've got to learn to show it on paper, okay? And that's what's important. So here are the basics. Here are 4 questions that you have to be able to do in order to be able to solve that kind of a question, okay? So we're going to look at these independently. So here's our first one. So our job in this particular one is to find out what x is. So that means what I need to do is I need to get rid of this plus 9. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we do exactly like we've been doing on everything else. We're going to use integers. To get rid of that 9, I'm going to add the opposite. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, or I'm going to subtract 9. If I've got a plus 9, to make that go away, I got to do a minus 9. Now, here's the thing. We know a rule in math that if I do something to one side of a problem, I've got to do the same thing to the other side of the problem. So to get rid of that plus 9, I do a minus 9 on the left-hand side. So I've got to do a minus 9 on the right-hand side, because that kind of balances things out. So if you think about it in terms of a triple beam balance, or a two-pan balance, sorry, if I've got x plus 9 on this side and I've got negative 5 on that side, they're balanced. So if I put a minus 9 over on this side, my balance is going to get out of whack unless I put a minus 9 on the other side as well. Okay, and now it stays balanced. So now I do my math. So on the left side, my 9's go away. We're left with x is equal to, and now we got a negative 9 plus negative 5, which gives me negative 14. So what that says is that the value inside my x is negative 14. So negative 14 plus 9 is equal to negative 5. And that's what we're looking for. Okay, that's how we solve these equations. So let's look at another one. Okay, here's our next one. Now this one's a little bit different because it's got the letter on the right-hand side instead of on the left. Well, we've got to get used to working with letters no matter where they're at, because eventually you're going to have letters on both sides of the problem anyway. Okay, so here we go. First thing I'm going to do in a problem like this is I'm going to change my subtraction to addition, next number to its opposite. Because then if I mess something up and I add something I wasn't supposed to add, it's not going to mess up my problem, okay? Because in addition, if I flip-flop things around or whatever, I've got commutativity in addition. So I need to get rid of this thing here that's with our letter. So in order to do that, we're going to add its opposite. So I've got a negative 8, so that means I'm going to add a positive 8 to get rid of it. And if I add it on one side, I've got to add it on the other side as well. So now my negative 8 and my positive 8 are going to cancel each other out. And on the right-hand side, I'm left with my m, which is exactly what I want. I want that letter to be left by itself. So now we've got 19 plus 8. And 19 plus 8 is going to give us 27. That's all there is. So that means 19 is equal to 27 minus 8. And sure enough, it is. Okay, does that make sense? That's what we're looking for. Right, so let's try another one. So that's what we do with add, subtract. Now let's talk about multiply, divide. And this says I've got 3y's, or negative 3y's, and that's equal to 24. So basically what that amounts to is that I've got a y, and a y, and a y, and there's 24 things that I got to pass out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass out the 24 that's right here to each of these y's. Okay, so if I do that, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. And y is going to be equal to the amount that's on one y. Well, what I did was I took these y's, I divided it by 3, or in this case, I divided by a negative 3 because I need to turn it into a 1. And then I also divide this number by negative 3. So these 3's divide out because of what I want to know about is 1y. And how much is 1y worth? Well, 1y is worth, well, here's 8 of them. And what kind of 8 would it be? A negative. So we end up with negative 8. And that's really what we're doing with multiply and divide, is we're taking however many y's I have right here. In this case, I've got 3. I'm separating them out. And however much is that's equal to, I'm dividing it up into the y's accordingly. So in this particular one, if I had to multiply by negative 3, what I do to get rid of that is I do a divide by negative 3. Just like in addition, I did a subtraction. In this subtraction, I did an addition. So it makes sense that if I have a multiply, I'm going to do a divide. So what if I actually have a divide? Well, if you have a divide, you're going to do a multiply. So here I have r divided by 4, or another way of writing that is 1/4 r. Okay, so that's really what I'm looking for. And 1/4 of an r is equal to negative 12. Well, I don't want to know about 1/4 of an r. I want to know about a whole r. Okay, so if I've only got 1/4, that means I need to get 4 of those to get a whole one. So if I multiply this by 4 over 1, or up here if I multiply by 4, I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to multiply by 4, and you end up with r is equal to negative 48. That's all there is to it. So if 1/4 of an r is equal to negative 12, 1/2 of an r would be negative 24, 3/4 of an r would be negative 36, and 4/4 of an r, or 1r, would be equal to negative 48. So in order to reverse an addition, we do a subtraction. In order to reverse a subtraction, we do a addition. In order to reverse a multiplication, we do a division. And in order to reverse a division, we do a multiplication. Now that's what you should have learned back in 5th and 6th grade. Okay, now we got to do a 7th grade problem. And here's what 7th grade is about. It's taking those two things and putting them together into what we call a two-step equation. And so this is where we have to understand that idea of order of operations and reversing those. So we've got to first get rid of our add subtract. Okay, so that means that I got to get rid of that negative 5 right there, or that minus 5, however you want to read it. So anytime I see a minus, I immediately change my subtraction to addition next to its opposite. Now I need to get rid of, or reverse, add subtract. So to get rid of that plus negative 5, I'm going to add a plus positive 5. And if I add that to one side, I'm going to add that to the other as well to maintain balance. So now if I put my two sides together, I get 3x. My two 5s are going to zap each other out, and that's going to be equal to 15. So we just did what we had to do on this step right here. How do I get rid of an add? I do a subtract. That's all we got to do. Okay, so now I got to get rid of a multiply. So how do I get rid of a multiply? I do a divide. Okay, so I'm going to do a divide by 3. And then if I divide that side by 3, I got to divide this side by 3. And we end up with x is equal to 15 divided by 3 is 5. So that means 3 times 5 minus 5 is going to give me 10 as an answer. And sure enough, it does. Now, some of you are still going to say, well, Mr. Nash, I can do all this in my head. You're right. But what we're working towards is this. Okay? Most of you can't do all this in your head. Okay, so that's why we've got to learn these steps. And if you don't do the steps, you don't get the credit. So let's do another one. So here's another one. We're going to do the same exact thing. I need to first get rid of that 12. So I've got a plus 12, so we're going to do a minus 12. Okay, or a plus and negative 12. And if I do a minus 12 on one side, we got to do a minus 12 on the other, which is a negative 12. So now we do our math. On the left-hand side, I'm left with 5t. My 12s go away. And on the right-hand side, I'm left with negative 30 when I put those together. Okay, so now I need to get rid of a multiply by 5. And how do I get rid of a multiply by 5? We do a divide by 5. These 5s divide out, become a single t, is equal to negative 30 divided by 5 gives me negative 6. So that tells me that 5 times negative 6 plus 12 is going to equal negative 18. And sure enough, it does. Okay, so let's look at just a couple more problems. Got just a couple more here that we'll look at, just kind of different variations to make sure we understand to do it before we end this video. So what if I have a divide by? Okay, well, we start off the same exact way. We start off by getting rid of that plus 6. We do that by getting rid of it by doing a minus 6. So I do a minus 6 on both sides. Okay, so I end up with g over 4. My 6's go away, is equal to, and negative 4 and negative 6 is going to make a negative 10. Now, I need to get rid of a divide by. So what did we have to do with divide by to get rid of a divide by? We had to do a multiply by. That's exactly what we have to do. So if I've got a divide by 4, I'm going to just do a multiply by 4 out to the side. Do a multiply by 4 out to the side. These 4's now divide out because there's a 4 on top and a 4 on bottom. So I'm left with just G, and G is equal to negative 10 times 4, which is negative 40. So in essence, negative 40 divided by 4 plus 6 is going to give me a negative 4 as an answer. Simple as that. Okay, so now, what if my letter was on the other side? Is it going to be any different? No. Now, you could flip it around if you wanted to. If you wanted to take this right-hand side and move it over to the left, that'd be okay. You just got to make sure that your signs are still correct. So you could do it that way and still get the same exact answer. I just choose to go ahead and leave it right where it's at because eventually I'm going to have letters on both sides. It's not going to matter. Okay, so let's see. I need to first get rid of this plus 5. We do that by doing a minus 5. And so I do a minus 5 over here. So now I do the math. 21 take away 5 gives me 16 equals. My 5's are going to go away, and we'll be left with 4n. So I divide both sides by 4, and I end up with 16 divided by 4 is 4. 4 is equal to n, or n is equal to 4, whichever way you want to see it. So in essence, 21 is equal to 4 times 4 plus 5. And if you do the math, it does work. Now, if you work the problem using this other equation, you're going to get the same exact answer. Now, there's a couple other examples that we could look at that we're going to look at in class, but that's in essence what we're going to do. So what you're going to do in your assignment today is something very similar to that. You're just going to solve some two-step equations, and that's what we're looking at today. So until next time, I'll talk to you later.